knowing the fact that you have done this work on the ground, confronting all kinds of obstacles, people on all sides of the aisle politically, people with labels that it's very easy to call racist, who would be identified as part of the system of systemic racism, and yet you found a way to break through. And not just anecdotally or on a personal level, you found a way to break through and move the needle on criminal justice reform in the face of systemic racism. So for me, what you have done eclipses everything that we say systemic racism is intended to diminish. So I'd like your insight, Desmond, on how you took a path to confront systemic racism in the way that you did and to be so successful in doing so.
Wow. You know, just listening to you, I'm reflecting on what we were able to accomplish and how you're talking about probably one of the most controversial topics, of voting rights to people with felony convictions in the most controversial state, the state of Florida. Yeah. Actually, it's 3 states. Some people say it's 3 states in one. At a time or in an environment that breathed hate, fear, division, right? But yet we were able to actually, I guess, dice through all of that and emerge from that cesspool, right, with a victory that was just shrouded in love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? Where we were able to actually have people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, actually support this, right? And I tell folks that we had over 5.1 million people who voted for, our amendment, and that's 1 million more than voted for any person on that ballot. And we know that at least 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current governor, which shows a wide cross-section of support. And so those votes was not based on hate. They weren't based on fear. They were rather based on love. I think what was so important, right, was to be able to cut through, right? Now we acknowledge the racist history of felon disenfranchisement in this country. We acknowledge that. But we did not allow ourselves to be just defined just by that moment in history. Yes. But rather, we allow ourselves to actually expand that to include so many people, because the reality was, even though the original intent of felon disenfranchisement was specifically to target newly freed slaves, yes, right? The reality is, like a tumor left unchecked, it would grow throughout the rest of the body, and now everyone is infected, right? Absolutely. And so we were able to actually now show that there was like so much interconnectivity, which in a sense helped kind of knife through the racism, because the racism is really a limited sense of thinking, right? So we were able to actually elevate above that. And what transcends the racism to me is love. Yes. Right? And so be able to connect these people with someone who they loved, who was impacted by the system, and have them mobilize and organize around that with that thought in their head. And so it wasn't a primal response that was triggered in people when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about African Americans. No, when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about someone who they loved, right? And that's who they stood up for, and that's who they fought for. And we were able to be successful because of that.
First of all, I just think that is such a brilliant analysis and strategy in terms of how we build effective mass-based movements for justice, for social justice and human rights.